Welcome everyone to the virtual internship advice in a COVID world. This is a workshop brought to you through the Liberal Arts Career Enrichment Network. My name is Katie Wysocki and I serve as the Assistant Director in the office. We are joined today by three student leaders within the College of the Liberal Arts. They have done wonderful things as students and professionals in their own industry. And they're here today to share a little bit about their own experience with a virtual internship, how they have adapted with the changes due to COVID-19 and have realigned their professional goals for this summer. We are currently recording so that you can enjoy this at a later date from June 17th. And we'll be able to answer any questions through LA Network at psu.edu. With that said, I'd like to have everyone introduce themselves. And Casey, since you're at the top of the screen, we'll start with you.
I have to unmute first. So hi, my name's Casey Sennett. I'm a rising junior at Penn State, triple majoring in anthropology, Jewish studies, and history. And this summer, I have been working as a virtual curatorial affairs intern with the Tennessee Holocaust Commission. So I've been doing different research and different things for the commission as well as transcription. And then I'm also working as a virtual volunteer for the Jewish Capitol Museum as well.
Thank you. Hope, would you like to go next?
Sure. So my name is Hope Bodenschatz, and I am an integrated undergraduate-graduate student at Penn State. I'm working toward a master's degree in economics and bachelor's degrees in economics, geography, and political science. So I'm entering my 5th and final year at Penn State this fall. And this summer, I'm working as a research assistant for the Longitudinal School Attendance Zone Boundaries Project. That's an initiative I'm working under the guidance of Dr. Chris Fowler, who is a professor in the Penn State Department of Geography. Yeah.
Thank you. Michaela?
Hi, my name is Michaela Casey. I'm a rising senior at Penn State, studying Spanish and security and risk analysis, which is in the College of IST. And I currently work as a virtual intern at Archbow Consulting, which is a pharmaceutical and biotechnological consulting firm. And what's interesting about Archbow, especially given the current situation, is that Archbow is entirely virtual. And so I'm not the only virtual person, and the concept of working from home or working remotely is not new at all for anybody at any level of this company.
That's a good point, Michaela, and I'm sure that that has allowed the transition for them to be non-existent, right? Because they're used to doing it already. I'm going to start with you, Michaela. I know you just muted yourself, but could you share a little bit with everyone how you adapted to your changing internship situation? I know you had a different situation prior to Archbow. How did you handle all of that?
Yeah, so I previously had an in-person internship with HughesNet in Virginia, or in Maryland, and they reached out to me and had said that unfortunately they couldn't onboard any new interns as much of their own staff was going to be transitioning to remote work. And I emailed them back and I had asked if I would be able to work remotely. And unfortunately, they didn't have the capabilities for that. But I had previously applied for an internship with Archbow, and I had made it to about the second round of interviews. And then I told them that I had accepted this position with Hughes, pretty obviously politely and professionally, and wished them the best. And I decided to reach back out to them to see if they had filled the position, even though it had been about a month. They had filled the position. They reached back out to me and said, yes, we filled the position with somebody else. However, if you'd like to speak to one of our founding partners, we can set up a call. And it was a very informal call. It felt very much like a conversation. And I spent much of the call just talking about actually my Spanish major, much more than my SRA major, which was very interesting because they were looking for an information management intern. someone to really handle their file structure. But my quote unquote like interview, which I use that term very loosely because it was very much just a conversation, was just me kind of going off on a rant about how Spanish and security and risk analysis kind of tie together in the way that language and the way that the human brain like organizes language is similar, or at the very least should be similar to the natural way in which we should organize our file structures. And it must have made sense to Douglas, who is the partner that I spoke with, because at the end of the call, he was essentially just like, okay, when can you start? Which felt like the virtual equivalent of walking into an office and saying, hey, can I speak to your manager, see what kind of positions are open? So it felt kind of surreal in that way, but it just kind of taught me like, you're not going to know unless you ask, you know?
Way to use your resources and go back to the initial offer. You're right. You would have never known. So
exactly.
Yeah. Casey, you were intending to do an international internship, and obviously that came to an end early on and allowed you some time to kind of pivot. How did that go for you?
Yeah, so I was originally planning on doing an international internship this summer in Berlin, and I had intended between my junior and senior year, I wanted to do a domestic internship. So whenever everything started happening with COVID and during spring break when all summer study abroad programs were canceled, I started just researching and looking into what opportunities were still available in terms of internships. So I started really just scouring the internet, seeing what was available. I knew I wanted to work preferably in a museum or something that had to do with Jewish or history, Holocaust education. So I really narrowed my focus in those two kind of aspects and started looking what was available. And unfortunately, as I went through the process, I ended up applying to about 20 different internships. However, that was whenever the world was very much changing. So there were several places that I actually interviewed with, but unfortunately, a couple weeks later, I was getting, unfortunately, we can't have internships this summer. Our museums are closed. We can't really do anything online. So I definitely got several rejections, and some still actually haven't even responded to me, even though I interviewed in March. So, but I was very grateful enough that the Tennessee Holocaust Commission, which was ironically one of the first internships that I saw and ended up applying for, they normally have a cohort of 4 interns, and they decided to keep that same number, but everything is just virtually, because I guess in general, they don't necessarily have a home for the commission in general. So we would typically be working in different office spaces around Nashville. So we were able to very much move that experience online. So I wanted to work more in education this summer, but whenever I got the offer for the curatorial affairs intern, I knew it was a really great internship experience to just be able to gain in general, and as well as to be able to focus on the content material that I wanted to at least work with to see if in fact Jewish and Holocaust education is what I do want to pursue eventually.
Great. So I think you're really showing how initiative is an important skill set through navigating the changing times right now. And what we heard from Michaela is taking chances and circling back and using your resources. And Hope, I think you really navigated by using your network, right? And your current connections. Can you tell us a little bit about how you adapted?
Yeah, definitely. I think network is so important. So when I started, my original plans for this summer were to do a 2-week geography study abroad, and then I was going to be in Tacoma, Washington, with a National Science Foundation, RIU, studying gerrymandering. And like Casey and Michaela, when I found out mid-spring that one and then both of those opportunities weren't able to happen this summer, I started the search again as well. And as Katie said, my network was really, really integral to finding this opportunity, because when I was kind of figuring out I'd missed the deadline for some other internships, and I knew at that point that I wanted to look for a local opportunity or a virtual opportunity because I wasn't sure that traveling would be really possible this summer. I reached out to Dr. Fowler to ask if he knew about local opportunities, and he offered me this opportunity to work with him. And that ended up even though it wasn't what I'd originally planned to do this summer, I had an opportunity. I realized when I was shifting my plans that there were other ways that I could really use this summer productively. And two of those for me were that this next year I have both an honors thesis and a master's thesis on my plate. So this summer I'm able to spend part of the time, part of the research or the data set that I'm helping to create is actually going to inform my thesis. So Dr. Fowler is my thesis advisor, and having that connection and working closely with him will really help to give me a head start on that. As well as I'm able to get 2 classes out of the way this summer too, which has been really helpful, just making the class load next year easier and kind of adding in some routine to a virtual summer.
Great, great. Thank you so much for all sharing that. I want to say to our attendees we have today, I have questions and I will be the moderator. My name is Katie Wysocki, but we are open to questions from you. So please feel free to add those in the Q&A and we will navigate those with our panelists. So with that said, can you tell a little bit about how you're managing your day-to-day with your virtual internship, how many hours you're committed to that, and how you manage and stay focused in your responsibilities for that? And some of you are taking classes as well. I'll let you guys decide this time.
I can start us off. So this internship experience for me is a little bit different than last summer. I was working full-time at an internship. This summer I'm doing a part-time internship and I'm taking a couple of classes. So that's been sort of different to adjust to because I'm splitting time between these different commitments. However, I think for me, what makes a big difference, I know I'm a big routine person and a big schedule person. So having, I've set kind of consistent hours where, okay, this part of the afternoon is dedicated to my internship. And every day, that's when I log onto my computer and I spend this amount of time working. And I think that's really what has made this helpful to me. Not that there doesn't have to be flexibility in that sometimes and adaptation, but just saying, okay, even though I'm not going to the office that would kind of normally signal that, you know, it's a work part of my day, I'm still setting aside those hours and kind of trying to segment my time and still create somewhat of a balance.
Yeah, I guess for me, so I'm doing like a full-time internship, so I'm doing about 7 hours a day. So I know for me, that was one thing that at first it was a little bit difficult to adjust to. While obviously I do a lot of work in school and I'm constantly moving around, just sitting at my desk for 7 hours, like obviously I take some breaks, was a little bit of an adjustment, especially when I'm online and, you know, sometimes there's temptations to maybe get on Facebook or another website I maybe shouldn't get on. So I know I actually emailed my mentor through the liberal arts alumni mentor program to ask her how she's dealing with working from home, because this is besides working with school, which I think is a different experience in general. I was like, how do you navigate staying online and staying focused? So she told me about this technique. It's called the Pomodoro technique. And essentially you set a timer and make a task for however long you want. I usually set my timer for around 40 minutes or so. And then every time that you hit that 40-minute mark, you take 5 minutes to either get a tea or coffee or just to walk around to take a little break in order. So every time you know how long you have to focus for, but then you can take those couple minutes to like rejuvenate yourself or to walk around. So for me, it was kind of figuring out how long can I really sit still and how can I be the most productive, but also move around and make sure that I'm still taking care of myself and, you know, really focusing on my work and not just kind of sitting here.
Yeah, I think that's definitely an important balance that you have to strike. Um, I I have used the Pomodoro technique in the past for like when I'm working on schoolwork, but I haven't thought to use it with my internship, so that would be super useful. My internship is also a 40-hour a week internship, and I'm also taking a couple of classes, so it's definitely a balance that has to be struck. And I've been kind of treating it like even though it's a virtual internship and I don't have to go to the office, I go to the office, that is my desk. I try to go about the same time every morning. If I'm a little bit late, it's not the end of the world. And then I try to like leave the office, and when I leave the office, metaphorically, my internship has given me a computer, and so I shut that computer and I plug it into the charger and I walk away. And I don't answer any emails until the next morning. And I don't really try to solve the problems given to me in my internship until I'm physically at the office, which is my desk. And that kind of helps me kind of break up what is work and what is home. And I start to do the same thing. I've started to do the same thing more or less with my my classes, although that's a little bit different because I have a number of group projects. And so I've been kind of balancing that by creating like a physical space that represents what would be an actual physical space, but outside of my home. And in that sense, I've been able to kind of stay productive while also like managing, staying at home and managing that time. I've also, one of the more recent strategies that I've undertaken is I have 5 or 6 Post-it notes sitting on my desk, and I put my glass of water on, they're labeled 1 through 6, and it starts at 6 and goes down to 1. I put the glass of water on the 6, and then when I finish that glass of water, I can get up and go get a break, usually to go to the bathroom because I'm drinking so much water. But it's doubly helpful because it helps me take a break and not kind of get lost in doing like different tasks for my internship, and then I look up and it's been like 3 hours and I haven't like stretched my legs. And it also helps me stay hydrated. So it's kind of a double whammy there.
Thank you. All good advice. I'm guessing when you come back, the glass of water goes on 5. Okay. So great advice. A balance of home and work is necessary, especially when it's one and the same. I think that my colleagues and I would speak the same advice that we're trying to do ourselves with our time and cutting off at some point and coming back to it later. So my next question, until I get any questions from the attendees, is do you feel that you have clear expectations from your internship site? And how do you determine what you do every day and what deadlines you may or may not have? Casey, do you want to start?
Yeah, I guess I can start. So the 4 interns, we all have different projects and different like titles, but we all meet every Friday with our supervisor and then a couple other members of the commission. And usually we kind of have a debriefing session where we talk about, you know, what we did that week, and we usually have assignments given out each Friday. I know this last Friday, however, my supervisor was actually going from Tennessee to Montana. So the like last week or more or less has been more of us just kind of figuring out or trying to keep up with deadlines. So generally we're given a task every week that we should complete or try to work on by the end of the week. We usually have loose deadlines. There's usually not like we want this done by 5 p.m. on Thursday, but just more or less, you know, we want to meet this day if you could have this done. So for me, it's kind of been having a general sense of, they usually give us a long-term and then a short-term project. So we know, you know, try to get the short-term project done, but if you kind of get bored or you need to, you know, mix it up a little bit, you can work on the long-term. Personally, I just finished both my short-term project and have done a lot of work on my long-term. So I know there's also a balance that I've made where I have my own projects, but they also like to have your own creativity and opinion. So for the current research that I've been working on and transcriptions of documents, I've actually made a family tree for this family because it was kind of confusing working with 5 generations of family members, figuring out who is who. And then I'm going to create now a document that I'm detailing in these letters who exactly is talking and information about them so we can see more about them as a person. So it's one of those things where I have my assignments, but they're very much open to whatever you think would benefit or help for this possible upcoming exhibit. So that's really what I've been working on, is trying to prioritize what they want done, but also figure out what could help them in the long run and what I think would also be beneficial.
I can go next. I had a meeting at the beginning of the summer with Douglas, the person who I had spoken to, as well as Melissa, who was the person that had interviewed me the first couple of times, and then also the other intern that they had hired, who's also from Penn State and is also a security and risk analysis major. And we kind of worked through a document of like a very long list of tasks that they had a general sense of the order in which they thought they could be completed, but the basic idea was just, when you're done with your internship, this list will be completed. Whenever that happens, it happens. And so they've been a lot of like long-term tasks, and especially the first two tasks on the list were to completely redo their file structure on Dropbox and eliminate any duplicate files. And that consisted of about 43 gigabytes of data or 1,700 folders. And so the first couple of weeks of the internship, that was the only thing that we were doing. And the second task is to index all of their PowerPoint slides individually. So kind of the same thing, but just exactly like only on PowerPoint. And so while we don't have super strict deadlines, we've been kind of we've been moving faster than they anticipated, because they kind of expected those two large tasks to take up like half the summer or 2/3 of the summer, because I mean 1,700 folders is completely unfathomable when you first look at it. But with two interns, that's the only thing sometimes we would do all day for a week. We've been able to like move forward with that, and we're almost done with both projects. And it's given us a lot of flexibility now, because since we've kind of moved past those initial expectations that our supervisors initially had for us. For example, I had a call with my supervisor, Melissa, yesterday, and I told her how far I had gotten on the file structure and the slides. And I expressed like how I mean, nothing against the tasks themselves, but it does get a little bit monotonous on like the 4th or 5th week of doing this for 40 hours a week. And she was able to kind of move around the structure a little bit so that I can dive into some of the smaller tasks that they had almost kind of tacked on at the end, but still very interesting and still very important tasks. Like they want to standardize a template for some of the contracts that they do, as well as kind of crafting a cybersecurity training for all of their remote workers. Since this is a remote company, everything that they do is done in the cloud. And so, but since they're kind of new, they don't have many formal rules on how to deal with cybersecurity. And so that's kind of one of the tasks that's upcoming, that they were able to kind of move around, since those expectations are just kind of, we don't have an order necessarily in which you're going to do it, but whenever you feel like doing it, we'll talk about it. And that's been really, really freeing.
Yeah, so my job really lends itself, I think, well to a virtual atmosphere because it's really individualized work. So I think I'm kind of lucky in that a lot of my work would look the same probably if it wasn't a virtual internship. But one thing that really helped was part of my job this summer is, this is a multi-year project, and creating this data set and doing the GIS work that's needed to create these school boundaries and make this workable for researchers is something that I'm not going to be able to finish this summer, obviously, and there'll be research assistants after me. So as the first of those research assistants for the GIS side of things, I'm helping to kind of lay the foundation for the future. So part of setting expectations for me was during the first set of boundaries that I made, I had a Zoom call with Dr. Fowler, basically at each new stage, so that we could talk through how the software would work, what kind of he's looking for, and making sure that that is clear. And then we created together this workflow document that outlines the process of how to create each boundary. So that's something that now is written down. Now, when this is passed on to another research assistant next summer, they will have kind of that outline of expectations. And that's something that I've just been adding to as well. It's useful for me to go back to make sure that I'm checking all the boxes I need to. And so often my work is also, because it's this multi-year project, my work is basically a continuation of yesterday's work usually, that the time I put into it, creating each boundary takes multiple days. And so I'll check in with via email if it's something new, just to make sure that I'm moving kind of in the right direction with the next boundary I start doing, or the next school district I start working on. But usually at the end of each workday, I'll kind of lay out, okay, here's the things, kind of like what Michaela and Casey were saying with, setting your work aside at the end of the day. I'll go through and say, all right, here's 5 things I wanted to finish today, but my work hours were done. So here's exactly where I'm going to pick up tomorrow. And that helps me to just keep going. Then when I log in the next day, I'm not kind of trying to search and get back into the mindset of where was I at the end of my workday yesterday.
That's a great point, Hope, and that is very helpful. I used to do that in the office, and I need to revisit that here, because sometimes in the morning you get caught up in email, right? And then you're like, oh, I got to refocus. So that ending your day with a note to yourself for tomorrow is a good idea. So you mentioned that you think that even in person you would be doing something very similar, but I wanted you all to think about what skill set you're learning because you are virtual. What are you going to take away from this experience being virtual that you probably wouldn't have being in person? And what makes it different? And maybe what are some highlights that you would focus on your resume in those bullet points? Michaela, do you want to start?
Sure. I think one of the most obvious ones has got to be the concept of time management, because when you're going into a physical office, you show up at 9, you leave at 5, and you can essentially count that as, okay, I had a full day of work, where you might have spent like in total a minute here, a couple minutes there, and maybe you only had like 5 or 6 hours of actual productive work. And when you're working from home, it's much easier to kind of recognize that, oh, well, I wasn't that productive today, so I really only got like 4, maybe 5 hours of work in today. And then it's hard to determine, like, okay, how do I reach that 40 hours every week? Or how do I reach X number of hours, whatever I need to reach? And so just kind of good time management. For me, I've been setting my phone aside and only bringing it to my desk when I know that I'll need to text with the other intern, or if I know I'm going to have a call that day. But just kind of, because I mean, for the first week and a half, it was very easy for me to kind of say to myself, okay, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to scroll through Instagram, and then it's 6 o'clock. And I'm like, oh, I've done nothing today. And so it's just been kind of, the elimination of my phone in my workspace has definitely been a huge bonus. And also just being conscious of what I'm doing and how productive I'm being throughout the day, just kind of checking in with myself whenever I take a break of, okay, well, how effective are you managing your time? And could you be doing something different when we go back to work? Like, And I think that that's a huge skill that a lot of people, especially like recruiters, are definitely looking for. And I think that a virtual internship like this is a great opportunity to prove to future employers, like, I am independent and I can manage myself without someone looking over my shoulder every 3 seconds. And on, and that applies whether I'm going to be in the office or I'm going to be wherever you need me. And I think that's definitely something that's going to be changing over the next couple months and over the next couple years. So I think definitely seizing that and being able to market that going forward is something that I've appreciated a lot.
Absolutely. We've been working with recruiters throughout this period, and many of them are saying, they're looking to see how students and recent graduates are adapting to the COVID-19 situation, and were they able to navigate and pivot, and they foresee that success or whatever came to light in lieu of whatever they had planned could be important for them to see how they work, right? And it could be a future interview question of how did you handle this situation? So absolutely, recruiters are interested in this type of experience. Casey, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think in terms of more like hard skills that I've definitely learned this summer so far is really not that I didn't have experience researching, but that's something that I've really been spending a lot of my days doing, is just scouring various databases or ancestry or different resources to figure out how can I find information on this specific topic, where can I find it, how can I find like primary sources, photographs, different things that I had never necessarily had as much experience. And also to a certain extent too, it's also made me look wider, because a lot of the content is in Nashville archives or databases. So I know like I have a running like biographical like sheet that I have all this information with, but a lot of them I'll highlight and say, I personally can't get a hold of these. But if you go like to the Nashville Public Library, the Nashville archives, or like the Jewish Community Center in Nashville, like you'll be able to find these resources. So even being able to connect with individuals that personally I won't be meeting, but that I'm trying to align these various resources that they can use down the road, is something that I've really gained, because personally I wouldn't be looking through these databases otherwise, but they've kind of taught me what is out there in terms of research or what available sources, in addition to using the resources that I have at Penn State through our library's databases. I think it's been something that's really made me think about it. And I also think in general too, in more of like a phrase to sum up my internship, I would say I've really learned better like initiative in general, just getting the internship and continuing to look into different things and seeing what's available. I think the fact too that, like Michaela said, you don't have someone always looking over your shoulder. You need to have initiative in yourself to continue working on. And also, I know something that I've been able to interact with my fellow interns at our weekly call, but that's something that I really wanted to make connections. So I know like the first day when we had our orientation, I emailed everyone and said, hey, can you guys give me your phone numbers? Like I'll make a group me. So we've had a couple of Zoom meetings. And I think that's something too, where I'm trying to make a community where, we might not be able to meet in person ever, but I still want to have these connections, build my network, and get to learn more about the people that I'm working with or that I'm working beside.
That's great, Casey. Of course, you're an ambassador and bringing people together, right? But I think you're right. You need to take the initiative, because sometimes connecting with people is more difficult. So you have to carve out that time within your work day to make sure you're communicating well with each other. So great. Good job. Hope?
Yeah. So I think a lot of what I've learned this summer, kind of piggybacking on what the others have said, is, it's very independent work. And I think particularly in my case, I'm learning a different GIS software that's similar to things I've used in the past, but there's been a lot of troubleshooting and learning for myself. So I think while I've been able to get help and training on this, it's also been a confidence booster of I can work through a lot of kind of troubleshooting, learning this program on my own too. But another thing with it is in trying to make these school boundaries into a data set, a lot of decisions need to be made in terms of not every school district is the same. I'm not always getting the same files that I'm trying to make into, GIS shape files that you can use in maps. And so at the beginning of when I made the first boundary, I talked to Dr. Fowler about, he said basically that he trusts me to make a lot of these decisions. And so I think that, obviously on bigger things, I'll reach out and to him and to his colleague in the College of Education, who's also helping to direct this project. But for a lot of the smaller decisions, it's, getting into a mode of, okay, I'm trusted to make the call and I can do that. And sort of getting into that work mindset of realizing, I think when you're in school, there's so much of everything comes down to a rubric. Everything is pretty clear what's expected, what you should be doing. And I think when you get into the working world, and especially when you're working on a project by yourself, it's realizing, okay, I can lean on myself and I trust the decisions that I'm making.
Great advice, Hope. I think we all have those moments too of reminding ourselves why we are in the position we are. One of the things I wanted you guys to share, I was curious about how often you're communicating, and Hope, if you want to start, I hear you're able to reach out to your supervisor when needed. Do you have regular communication check-ins with any of the team or your supervisor?
So not at this point. It's mostly in the first week or so, it was more kind of, if I had a question, I'll reach out via email. Some of those emails ended up turning into Zoom calls because it was just easier to be looking at the same screen and working through this. But mostly it's pretty independent. I reach out if I have questions, but it's still been really pretty easy to get in contact. Even though we're not working in the same space, I don't feel kind of isolated from the team. And we did have a larger project meeting when I was more getting onboarded to the group. There's a couple of grad students in the College of Education who are helping to collect the basically non-geographic data that I'm then turning into geographic data. That's sort of my role in all of this. So I met them, and I met Dr. Frankenberg in the College of Education, who's the other faculty member at the head of this project. So I've had kind of communication with them, and I know I can always reach out to her specifically, especially with questions more related to what types of schools and what should I be including, things like that.
Good, good. Sounds like there was onboarding too. And it sounds like many of you had some type of orientation or onboarding. It's helpful. Casey or Michaela, do you have anything to add to your communication?
I have pretty structured check-ins, which is super helpful. I meet once at the beginning of the week with one of my supervisors, and then we kind of have a like a one-on-one meeting at the beginning of the week, and then we have a group meeting at the end of the week with both my supervisors as well as the other intern. And those are kind of our structured meetings that happen pretty much week in, week out. But then on the nice thing about it is a virtual company in which everyone is across the nation and even across the world. But the nice thing is that both my supervisors and Dan, the other intern, are both in the same time zone. We're all in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And so I can we all basically have the same core hours. And so we're good at like reaching out to one another via text or via phone, or that's the same thing, via text or call or email, and just kind of bouncing ideas off of one another, or if we have questions about how this file should be used. It's pretty straightforward in that sense. And so there's clear expectations in which I can kind of check in, make sure that I'm making progress, but then throughout the week, it's very flexible, and I don't feel, or I feel very comfortable like reaching out pretty much at any time with any questions.
Good to hear. And I'm Casey, you have an hour difference, right? So that's a good point Michaela brings up, is the idea is that a virtual internship, the headquarters could be anywhere. So fortunately for most of you, it's not very different, but do you have struggles with that hour difference, Casey?
I mean, so the interesting thing is most of our staff is in Tennessee. One of our interns is, and now my supervisor actually is in Montana. So I think she might even be an hour behind us further. So me and like, I currently, one other intern is in Eastern time. One intern normally is in Eastern time, but she's actually in Nashville visiting her boyfriend now. So really are all over the board. That is the funny thing. When any of us ever email, we always have to say what time zone it is. And I know my supervisors, like, if I ever say the wrong time zone, like, you need to let me know. Because I know a lot of us, when we have our weekly meetings, sometimes she'll like say the different time. So it's definitely been like navigating it has been interesting at times, but I will say they are very flexible with our hours. I typically work 9:30 to 4:30 EST, but I know they gave the option that you just have to overlap a little bit with operating hours. So if you wanted to work from 2 p.m. to 10, you're more than welcome to. So they definitely have that freedom and mobility that if the normal 9 to 5 doesn't work for you, that there are other options. So that was something, you know, just working with the time zone can be difficult. But since we only meet once a week and we have kind of that structured time blocked out where we know when we're going to meet, that gives us the opportunity that, you know, if we do have to communicate, we can just email. And sometimes it might take a couple hours because someone is in a different time zone, but we still have those communications and open like airways. Like I text like my supervisor Cami sometimes if there's like an emergency, like unfortunately we had to put one of my cats down last week, so I knew she might not be checking her email, so like I was just texting her letting her know that, you know, I wasn't able to go in that day because of what was going on. So I think just having those open communications, whether that's on the phone, on the email, I think that's just very important. And in addition to our weekly like meeting, I usually email her at least twice a week just to let her know what I've accomplished, if she can look over something for me, or if I just have an idea, because I'd rather her approve it versus me do it and then she'd be like, why did you do that? So that's one thing I've learned too, is nothing's ever a dumb question too. You know, I think I would rather have it cleared up and approved versus doing it and then being like, oh, did I do it right? It's better just to do it right one time, whether or not if you have to wait a couple hours to do it.
There are no dumb questions is right. So, and I would imagine as a supervisor working with virtual interns, hopefully they would create more of a concrete foundation for all of you because you aren't together. I'm sure, you know, both Hope and Casey work for me and in the Career Enrichment Network. I'm sure some days are like, just tell me what to do, Katie, and we're in person. So I'm sure that it changes very much so when virtual. And I'm glad to hear that you're all having very positive experiences. With that, I thought we would just end. If any of you have advice for those that are thinking about a virtual internship, maybe in the fall or the spring, or, you know, we don't know what the future always looks like right now in this world. What would your advice be to those who are considering a virtual internship, or maybe even who are currently having not as positive of experience as you all are having it this summer?
Go ahead, Casey. Okay. So I would say that one of the biggest things for me has been defining, I've talked a little bit about this before, but defining your space and just kind of making that your workspace. And this goes not just with virtual internships, but when you're doing schoolwork at home or when you're doing really any sort of work that is different than your everyday leisurely activities. And so I would say that's been the biggest thing for me. When I first started my internship, I decided that I wanted to be able to work outside because it was just getting nice out. And I wanted to be able to get some fresh air and not be cooped up all day. And that worked really well until I started to get tempted to like just talk to my family members who might be working on the front porch as well, or might just be like kind of chilling there. And so now what I've been doing is I've been working in the mornings outside to kind of get that balance in the same spot pretty much every day. And then once my family starts to get up and get moving for the day, because I mean, I have 3 younger brothers and they don't really start moving until like 2 p.m. So once my house is sort of awake and moving, I'll move back up into my room or to usually my room because that's really the only space where I'm not going to be disturbed. And I have a desk. And the other thing is, I had talked a little bit about this with Katie before, but I recently upgraded my workspace in my room, and I no longer sit in a chair. I sit on a yoga ball, and that's definitely been super helpful because it gives me it gives me flexibility, and it makes my workspace a little bit more fun without making it leisurely. And at the end of the day, my muscles aren't sore from sitting in a chair all day. So it's definitely a huge benefit to kind of define a space for yourself and then make that space your own.
Casey, Hope, any advice?
I guess I can go. I think especially for someone that's looking for an opportunity or wants to have one in the future, I think just keep an open mind and keep looking. I know, so I'm also a virtual volunteer for the Jewish Capitol Museum, and I had actually originally applied to be an intern there this summer, but unfortunately they actually don't have a brick and mortar museum and they weren't able to really host interns this summer. So they said instead that they were going to do a volunteer program. So I think even just looking into defining what is an internship, I think you could really work with places that maybe just need volunteers, but maybe you could just do more hours than a certain volunteer. I think just seeing what the definition of intern is and just working with maybe wherever you would like to work or a museum or something to get some sort of experience, even if maybe it's not the full-fledged internship, but you still get those hours, you still get that experience. That's definitely something I would look into. I would say have an open mind and see where it takes you.
Good point. All experience is good experience.
Yeah, that's for sure. My advice would be just to be patient too with the experience. It does feel different to be working virtually. And I think it takes time to form a virtual routine, settle in, find some of the best practices that we've been able to find. I know my first few days of working virtually didn't feel normal, just like the first few days of taking virtual classes didn't feel normal, but you become better at it. And I think the thing too is that, it's an uncertain time and it's hard to know, what the future of our careers is going to look like, whether virtual will be something that's used more frequently. And so I think building skills with that will show that you're flexible and that you're resilient with different working environments. So I think even if, it might not click with you right away, it's a really, really good experience to have, to be used to working in Zoom and used to knowing sort of how to check in and how to stay accountable to supervisors, and to stay motivated too. So I think some just patience and willingness to work with yourself and kind of figure out what works for you and for your company or your supervisors really goes a long way to helping to prepare you for whatever the world kind of throws at us next.
And who knows what that will be, right? Well, a big thank you to all three of you for being here with us this afternoon on this beautiful day in Happy Valley. Sun is out. Great advice. We know everybody's experience is a little bit different. We're encouraging you to find what works for you and to continue your professional development over the summer. For those of you who haven't seen the new website, we have Navigating Your Career During COVID-19 website. The website is gethired.la.psu.edu. This webinar and other summer webinars we're doing will be found here, as well as a summer checklist to create some goals to help support you as you navigate and get ready for the recruiting season of the fall. The career coaches in the Liberal Arts Career Enrichment Network are here all summer, so you can make an appointment at any time through your Nittany Lion Careers account. And we will continue to have resources available for you, both online and through those coaching appointments that will continue to be virtual. Please feel free to reach out to our office with any direct questions. That email was lanetwork@psu.edu. We will have 2 programs next week on June 23rd and 25th, Career Conversations. One will be with Professor James Tierney on entrepreneurship, and the other will be with Jonathan Hayes, who's the Vice President of Human Resources for Verizon Media. He will be talking about the HR world right now, as well as executive leadership and some great advice to get there. With that, I'm going to say thank you one more time to Casey, Hope, and Michaela. It was great to see you all, and we will see you next time.